Previously, I explained what ethics means and how the different ethical theories can be analyzed in metaethics. Now, I will take a look at the main types of ethical theories that mean to tell us what is good or evil and how to make the right ethical decisions. This branch of philosophy is called either prescriptive or normative ethics. Rather than give an ad hoc answer for each particular decision, they present general rules or norms that should help us make those decisions. They can also help us judge actions after the fact to assess whether those actions were right or not. This can hopefully instruct our future behavior and choices, assuming we can learn from the past. A major reason for studying history has been exactly that: to learn to avoid past mistakes as well as to emulate exemplary behavior. The first category of ethical theories I will cover is consequentialism, the idea that the moral value of an act depends on its consequences. It can also be called teleological ethics because in formulating norms, attention is paid to the goal or telos of the act. In other words, in deciding what to do, you are instructed to think about the future consequences of your actions. This sounds certainly like a good piece of advice, but is not without problems. The general problem for all forms of consequentialism is the difficulty of knowing all the consequences, and also choosing which consequences are relevant. After all, you could say that all past events influence all future events. Even a seemingly insignificant action may play a surprisingly big role in causing something else to occur. Say you're about to step into a bus that is about to leave the bus stop, and you see a child running toward the bus, clearly a bit late, but trying to make it into the bus in order to get to school in time. You ask the driver to wait a bit, and the child makes it. Unfortunately, the child is carrying a contagious disease, which will now be able to spread to all the passengers in the bus, as well as to the people at the school. Are you now responsible for this spread of disease? You were trying to do a good deed based on your limited knowledge, but is that commendable, or should we only look at the actual consequences? But which consequences? How far down the line? Perhaps there is a pregnant person in the bus who also contracts the disease. Somehow the disease affects the development of the nervous system of the fetus, which will be a partial reason why it will develop into an adult who enjoys power and the suffering of others. This person will go into politics and rise to power, even becoming a despot ruler, causing untold suffering. Surely you could not have expected this. How about counterfactuals? If you can prevent something bad from happening, surely you ought to do so, right? Say you're in a political rally and you see a man pulling out a gun as the party candidate is approaching. You have some means of preventing a murder by knocking out the would-be assassin, for example. You do so, only to learn that he was there to prevent the politician's rise to power and becoming a dictator. Now that you have stopped the gunman, there is nothing stopping the candidate, and as predicted by the attacker, the politician soon becomes the next Hitler. If you had not stopped the assassin, this would have been avoided, but then a murder would have been committed. In general, if something does not happen, how can you tell it would have happened had you not prevented it? Exactly how bad would the consequences have been, and how can you estimate them? Certain organizations claim that a person who downloaded pirated copies of 100 movies instead of buying them or paying some streaming service to watch them has in effect robbed the makers of those movies from the revenue they would have received if he had paid to see the movies. But would he really have paid the full price or any price to see those movies? Or did he only suffer through watching those horrible flicks because they were easily available to him? This is, of course, a purely hypothetical example. Different versions of consequentialism have different views on what sorts of consequences and for whom are to be assessed. Eudaimonism is the view that the relevant good being caused or assessed is happiness and well-being. So when deciding whether to help the child to get into the bus or not, you should think of the consequences of their making it in terms of the caused happiness and well-being. But of whom? The child's? Your own? The general public? Egoism is the view that one should look after one's own interests, or at least that it is ethically acceptable to do so. Hardly an opinion most people would call moral, even if many of them still act with mostly just self-interest in mind. Altruism is the view that one should seek to benefit others. Egoists may argue that often the person behaving altruistically is still serving their own interests, even deriving satisfaction from being able to help others. Of course, nothing in prescriptive egoism would lead a person to not derive pleasure from helping others. Egoism may in some way explain why people behave the way they do, but it is not obvious that it is adding anything significant to the discussion about ethics, in my opinion. An altruist can of course also find pleasure in being helpful or otherwise good to others, as I think most people actually do. And there is nothing wrong with that. It does not detract from the ethical value of what they do, and just because the altruist does derive pleasure from helping others, it does not follow that it is their reason for helping them. The most important form of consequentialism is utilitarianism, the idea that the moral value of actions depends on the utility of such actions. The utility here means goodness of outcome for people. Things like pleasure and happiness are considered good things for people, so increasing those is good and reducing them is bad. Jeremy Bentham thought it should be possible to calculate the harms and benefits of an act to see how much total pleasure it will cause, for what duration and for how many people. Then ethical behavior would be only a matter of calculating the right choices and acting accordingly. Bentham's student, John Stuart Mill, paid more attention to the different qualities of pleasures. Some pleasures are more valuable than others due to their quality. Learning new skills and gaining knowledge is better than just eating and drinking. Long-term pleasures, like the practice of philosophy, are the best. He famously wrote that it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Importantly, Mill was strict about ignoring the intent or motive of the act, as well as the virtuousness of the actor. All that matters is the act being judged. One obvious problem for this view is the difficulty of comparing different qualities of pleasures. There are two branches of utilitarianism, where act utilitarians think one should assess each act separately. Rule utilitarians think that instead of single acts, one should choose general rules that will bring about the greatest amount of good in the long run. Both agree that the goal should always be the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. The main problem for this view is that it pits the individual against the public. A common counter-argument for it is that the multitudes may benefit from, even enjoy, the suffering of one. This may sound implausible at first, but there are numerous real-world examples of this. The ancient Romans apparently enjoyed watching gladiators fight each other, sometimes even to the death, and criminals being tortured and burned alive, or mauled to death by wild animals. They especially enjoyed watching wild animals being hunted in the arena, so much that it had devastating consequences for wildlife in Africa, where the animals were imported from. Bullfights have been enjoyed by thousands of people in recent history. Many poor people still fight each other in Muay Thai, boxing or MMA tournaments, as it is their only hope to escape poverty. They extremely rarely die as the immediate result of a fight in a ring, but especially heavyweight boxers do seem to get permanent brain damage. Very few people make it out of poverty this way, yet millions enjoy watching them fight. So is that really any different from the ancient Roman gladiatorial games? A more imaginative, but in some ways plausible, scenario has also been used. The organs of a single person can be harvested for the benefit of many people. Let's assume that by killing one poor person and using their organs, we could save the lives of 2 or 3 others and make life better for an additional 4 people. The poor person's life would in any case be unpleasant, so we could convince ourselves that death would be better for them anyway. Does that mean that this murder would be the ethical thing to do? This example may be a bit far-fetched, but similar decisions are constantly being made in healthcare, and especially when deciding funding for healthcare. What kind of treatments and for whom are prioritized at the cost of leaving others without treatment? It has been suggested that rather than looking for the greatest good for the greatest number of people, we should instead seek to limit the suffering caused. This negative utilitarianism demands that our actions cause the least amount of suffering to the smallest number of people possible. Certainly sounds like a necessary corollary to be included with any consequentialist ethics. You may think that what makes an act right, the right thing to do, is not in the actual or possible consequences of the act, but rather in the motivation for the act. Immanuel Kant thought that the only ethical acts are those we do because it is our duty, our ethical duty, to do so. This is called deontological ethics, because the Greek word for duty or obligation is deon. Kant is the most famous proponent of this type of ethics. He thought that there are rules that people can choose for themselves, depending on what they want to achieve. If you want to learn a skill, you have to practice it. If you want to get good grades at school, you have to study, and so on. You choose your own goals, and you can change your choices, pick new goals, and the rules in a way follow from the choice. Kant called these rules that are based on your choices hypothetical imperatives. You may benefit from following those rules by learning to knit or speak a new language, or you can get good grades or a promotion at work or whatever it is you set out to achieve. But these are not ethical matters. When it comes to morality, there is no hypothetical choice, according to Kant. You always have a duty to act morally, whether you like it or not. You may act morally or immorally, but never amorally in such a situation. You cannot choose your action or inaction to not have an ethical dimension. Perhaps a bit strangely, Kant thought that your action is moral only if it is done out of duty, not for any other reason, even if it is to make others happy. The duty in question is not a duty to other people, but to the moral law. This famous ethical rule is called the categorical imperative, and it has two parts or formulations as follows. 1. Act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law. And 2. Always treat humanity, whether in ourselves or in others, as an end in itself, never as a means only. The first formulation can seem a bit strange, so I'll spell it out. The idea is that you should always act according to a law or rule that you want everyone to follow. The point is that you can't have different rules for yourself and for other people. This is, I think, a very typical way for people to think about ethics, but it is not without problems. For example, I have found myself in situations where I have talked about myself, my values, what I would or wouldn't do, and despite being, at least in my opinion anyway, very clear that I am only talking about myself, other people have thought that I am making ethical assessments of other people's behavior. One problem with this Kantian view, therefore, is that in requiring universal laws, it leads you to be equally demanding of others as of yourself, or to reduce the demands for all to the same level. In other words, it does not take into account that people are not all alike. It doesn't allow one to demand ethical excellence of oneself while requiring much less of others, which is typical at least for me. The second formulation is a way of stating that humans have intrinsic value. That is the basis of the idea of human rights, for example. It is a good reminder for everyone in their own mundane lives as well to not treat other people as just useful contacts and resources. At the very least, you should be able to understand that feeling like someone is using you is not pleasant, and you probably don't want much to do with people who you feel are just using you. So don't be a dick like that yourself. That's the basic idea. Another deontological approach focuses on rights, such as human rights, along with duties. We have a duty to respect the rights of others, allowing them to exercise their rights without being harmed or impeded by us. Perhaps we even have a duty to safeguard everyone's rights, defending them against those who would prevent them from exercising their rights. The rights in these theories don't have to be limited to humans, as other animals can also be thought to have rights, at least in ethics, if not yet in law. Liberal ethics, as an aspect of liberalism, is an approach to normative ethics that emphasizes liberty. The goal is to enable individuals to develop into the best versions of themselves, not to tell anyone how to live their lives. To make this possible, decisions and norms are to be evaluated on the basis of how they affect the freedom of other individuals. That means that everyone's rights must be respected. For example, you are allowed to hurt yourself by smoking, but your smoking must not harm anyone else. You need to obey the rules of traffic, because otherwise you may put others at risk without their consent. You can take part in a martial arts tournament at your own risk, but if you were to pick a fight with someone in the streets, you would be infringing on their right to live in peace, free of violence. So that's not okay. Ancient Greek philosophers were interested in cultivating people's virtues, arete. The right kind of upbringing or education, paideia, would turn a child into a virtuous adult who would always make the right choices and live well. For Aristotle, it was important to stick to the golden mean, the right choices between the extremes, he claimed. Bravery is a virtue, and it is clear that cowardice is a vice, but so is being foolhardy. The Latin word for virtue, virtus, is connected to the word for man, vir. So a virtuous person for the Romans was a manly man, or a real man. That reflects the patriarchal nature of Roman culture, and Greek culture was even more patriarchal. You might call them, like most cultures of the past, forms of macho culture. The medieval church incorporated classical ideas of virtue, but added Christian teachings in them. That is why, for a long time, the word virtuous has had a very religious connotation. It should be remembered that the origin was very different, and there is no reason to accept any old theory of virtues just because it is old. New systems of virtues can be devised that are more suitable for the present. That is not to say that all the old notions about virtues need to be thrown into the trash heap of history. They can still contain useful ideas. What, at the very least, seems to be still useful is the idea of the importance of upbringing or education, not just of children, but of adults as well. The Greeks included something like higher education in their paideia. The purpose was to help a person grow into a proper adult, as people don't just automatically grow up like that. I think this has been pretty much forgotten, which is unfortunate. I want to also point out that individuals can also sort of train themselves, as the ancient philosophers knew, by making a habit of virtue. You may have noticed that some things can feel hard to do, even if you actually want to do them. You may want to lose weight, or you would like to become a better runner, but leaving the comforts of your home to run in bad weather is a hard thing to do. This is the weakness of will again. You can make it easier by making a habit out of doing it. Go for a run every morning. Maybe at first you just walk around your house or block, but as you force yourself to do at least the minimum every morning, it becomes a routine. You can then increase what you demand of yourself. You can also make a habit of picking up litter or other good things like that. These good habits become a part of your personality, who you are. They will become much easier to do in the future. They can make you into a better person. If you need motivation, then how about this? Other people are likely to appreciate the better version of you more than your current self. You would like that, wouldn't you? Or perhaps you realize that you will appreciate yourself more, and perhaps that is more important. I have covered most types of normative ethics, explained their main ideas, and some of their main problems as well. You may feel a bit confused because I haven't told you which theory is the best or how you should make your choices in life. But the point of learning about these theories is not to pick one and stick to it. Instead, I want you to think about all these things, like all of philosophy in general, and use these concepts and ideas as tools in your own thinking. When thinking about your choices from an ethical point of view, you can use many different ethical theories to see how they would guide your choice. But hard and fast rules or solutions may not be available. We are forced to keep thinking for ourselves. That is all I wanted to say about normative ethics in this series. The next video will be about the philosophy of life, some attempts to answer the question, what is the good life? Bye for now. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.